Ever found yourself thrown into a situation you never expected, only to have it completely change the course of your life? That's exactly what happened to our protagonist in today's story. At first, it seemed like just another normal day in a quiet neighborhood, but little did he know that a simple request from his new neighbor would set the stage for something far more complicated and unexpected. Imagine this. You're living a quiet, structured life. You've got your routines, your work, your solitude. Then, one day, a friendly single mother moves in next door with her teenage daughter. It's all so normal, right? But then, something happens that shakes up everything you thought you knew. She asks you, yes, you, to mentor her daughter. Seems simple enough, right? But is it really? At first, our protagonist hesitates. He wasn't looking for any more responsibilities, especially not something as personal as mentoring a teenager. What does he know about guiding someone else through life? But after some thought, he agrees. And just like that, he's stepping into something that's going to test his boundaries, challenge his emotions, and completely change his life. So, what happens when a mentor-mentee relationship blurs into something deeper? How does one unexpected decision lead to emotions neither of them could have anticipated? Stick with us through this story, because by the end, you'll discover the twists, the lessons, and the emotions that come from something as simple as a neighborly request. In this video, we'll explore what happens when mentorship turns into something far more complicated, why some relationships are harder to define, and how even the smallest of requests can lead to life-changing consequences. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change the way you see the world. Let's get started. As the days passed, the protagonist began to settle into his new role as a mentor. At first, their meetings felt awkward, like two strangers trying to find their rhythm. He was unsure of what to say or how to connect with a teenager, especially one he barely knew. He'd never really worked with young people before, and the idea of guiding someone so closely felt like stepping into uncharted territory. But as time went on, things began to change. The girl, Sarah, was quiet at first, hesitant to open up to him. She'd nod politely, give short answers, but it was clear there was more beneath the surface. Slowly, though, the conversation started to flow more naturally. She revealed bits and pieces of herself, her dreams, her struggles, her ambitions, things she hadn't shared with many people. It was in those moments, when she spoke honestly about her life, that he began to understand her better. They found common ground in unexpected ways. They both loved reading. Sarah was an avid reader of fantasy novels, while he enjoyed historical fiction. They talked about books for hours, debating plot twists, characters, and what made a great story. Over time, these conversations became their foundation, and they both looked forward to their sessions more than they initially expected. But there was something more than just shared interests that began to draw him in. It was Sarah's smile. It wasn't just any smile. It was subtle, almost secretive, like a quiet confidence in her own world. Whenever she smiled, especially after a thoughtful comment or a shared laugh, it made him feel something he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something he hadn't felt in a long time. He found himself looking forward to their sessions not just for the mentoring, but for those small moments, the times when she would glance at him and that smile would appear. Almost like a private joke between them. It was a simple thing, but it affected him more than he realized. There was a warmth in that smile that seemed to connect him to her in ways he hadn't expected. Sarah, for her part, seemed to relax around him. She'd talk more freely, laugh at his jokes, and sometimes, when they spoke about deeper topics, he'd see that smile flicker again. There was something about her. It wasn't just the smile, but the way she saw the world, her innocence mixed with the hint of something deeper. She had this quiet strength about her, a subtle power that drew him in, though he wasn't fully aware of it yet. At this point, the mentorship was still straightforward. He would help her with schoolwork, guide her through decisions about her future, and occasionally offer life advice. But something was changing in him. What started as a simple request to help her figure out her future was slowly evolving into something much more complicated. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the connection between them was undeniable. Every time they met, it was like they were both learning something new, about life, about each other, and about themselves. It was a subtle shift at first, but he could feel the tension building between them, a quiet electricity that neither of them acknowledged outright. Yet, he couldn't deny it, it was there. And so, their meetings continued, the bond between mentor and mentee deepening with each passing day. But what neither of them realized was that the deeper they connected, the more complicated things would become. The lines between mentor and student, guide and friend, were starting to blur. Neither of them was prepared for where this journey would take them. As the weeks went by, the relationship between the protagonist and Sarah evolved in ways neither of them expected. What had started as a simple mentoring arrangement had gradually shifted into something more complex, something neither of them could easily define. Their time together wasn't just about helping Sarah with her studies or giving advice on her future. It became about moments where they truly saw each other, moments that lingered longer than they should have. For the protagonist, those moments were often unintentional. It wasn't as if he had planned to develop feelings, he was a professional, after all, and had been taught to maintain boundaries. But somehow, it wasn't just the mentoring sessions he was looking forward to anymore. He found himself anticipating their time together, looking for the quiet moments when Sarah would look at him with that smile of hers, almost like a secret, a bond between them that nobody else understood. That smile, so subtle yet powerful, had started to affect him more than he cared to admit. It lingered in his thoughts long after their sessions were over. He told himself it was nothing. That it was just a mentor's appreciation for a bright young person who was trying to make sense of her world. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was a warmth in Sarah that drew him in, an openness that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. And though he tried to push these feelings aside, they kept creeping back into his mind. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to be going through her own internal changes. She had always been reserved, almost to the point of being guarded, but now she was more open, more willing to share. She was more comfortable around him, and that comfort seemed to create a sense of ease between them. She would laugh at his jokes more often, ask about his day, and tell him things she hadn't told anyone else. There was a trust building between them, a connection that felt deeper than the mentor-mentee relationship they had started with. But what both of them failed to see was that the more they opened up to each other, the more vulnerable they became. It wasn't just about books or schoolwork anymore. It was about real life, Sarah's fears, her hopes, her insecurities. And while he tried to maintain his role as a mentor, he found himself becoming emotionally involved in her life in ways that were impossible to ignore. One afternoon, as they sat together in his living room, talking about the latest book they were reading, Sarah did something that made his heart skip a beat. She smiled, her usual, soft smile, but this time, there was something different about it. It was a smile that seemed to hold a deeper meaning, a quiet understanding that neither of them had spoken aloud. It was the kind of smile that told him she knew exactly how much he cared, even if neither of them dared to acknowledge it. In that moment, he realized something important. His feelings for Sarah were no longer just those of a mentor. There was something more, something unspoken, something neither of them could easily address. But he also knew that acting on these feelings was impossible. She was just a teenager, and he was supposed to be her mentor, not someone who could cross that line. He tried to push the thought out of his mind, but the pull of that smile, that quiet connection, made it hard to ignore. Sarah, for her part, seemed unaware of the effect she was having on him. She was still just a girl trying to navigate her way through adolescence, finding solace in the guidance and companionship he provided. But there were moments, small moments, when she would catch his eye, and there was a brief flicker of something more in her gaze. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that neither of them could fully comprehend. There was an unspoken tension in the air between them, and though they both tried to brush it off, it was growing harder to ignore. The protagonist's internal conflict deepened. He had always believed in clear boundaries, in the importance of keeping professional relationships professional. But here he was, finding it nearly impossible to keep his feelings in check. He wanted to help Sarah, to be there for her, but he also couldn't deny the way his heart raced when she smiled at him, the way he began to look forward to their sessions more than he ever expected. And so, they continued to meet, unaware of just how much their connection was changing them both. What had started as a simple act of mentorship was now a complex web of emotions, a mix of guilt, desire, and confusion. Neither of them had spoken of it yet, but the tension was building, and it was only a matter of time before something would have to give. As the weeks stretched on, the boundaries between mentor and mentee continued to blur, and the relationship between the protagonist and Sarah grew more complicated. What had started as professional, structured meetings gradually morphed into something far more personal. Their time together wasn't just about learning anymore, it was about sharing moments that neither of them had anticipated. It was like stepping into unknown territory where both of them were unsure of the rules. The protagonist had always prided himself on keeping things professional, but now it felt impossible. He had started to enjoy their time together in ways he hadn't expected. They would go beyond their usual discussions about books and schoolwork, talking instead about life, about dreams, about their struggles. The more they shared, the deeper their bond became. Every conversation felt like a step towards something more meaningful, something that felt more like a friendship than just mentorship. At first, it was small things, a shared lunch, an invitation to a local event, a casual movie night. Things that seemed innocent enough, but over time, they began to feel like something more. They'd talk about their favorite movies, discuss the meaning behind songs, even share secrets that neither of them had told anyone else. There were moments when the protagonist would look at Sarah, and it was as if he could see the entire world in her eyes, a glimpse into her soul that no one else could understand. She had a way of looking at him, not just with the trust of a student but with something deeper, something almost intimate. But with that intimacy came discomfort. Every time their connection deepened, he felt that familiar pull, the temptation to cross a line that should never be crossed. He had been her mentor for so long, and yet, in these small, shared moments, it felt like they were so much more. And though he tried to convince himself that he was just seeing things, that this was all just part of the process of mentorship, deep down he knew it wasn't. This wasn't just about being a guide to a teenager, it was about something that had nothing to do with teaching. It wasn't just the protagonist who felt the change. Sarah, too, had started to notice the shift. She was no longer the quiet, reserved girl who had initially shown up at his door, unsure of what to expect from this strange arrangement. Now, she laughed more easily, shared her thoughts without hesitation, and had begun to seek out his company more often. There was a level of comfort between them now, a familiarity that made their time together feel natural in ways it hadn't before. But as their relationship grew, so did the concern from the outside world. Their closeness didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors started to talk. Friends began to ask questions. It was all too easy to misinterpret their bond, especially considering the growing emotional intimacy between them. Rumors swirled, whispers of an inappropriate relationship that no one could quite define. And though neither of them had done anything wrong, the tension surrounding them began to build. It wasn't just the feelings between the two of them anymore, it was the judgment from others, the concern from those around them, that threatened to unravel everything. One evening, as they sat together in his living room, the mother of Sarah, the one who had originally asked him to mentor her, came over unannounced. There was a tension in the air as she entered, a certain coldness that hadn't been there before. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but she had a look in her eyes that made the protagonist uneasy. It wasn't the usual warm greeting he had come to expect. It was something different. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady but stern. "It's about Sarah." The protagonist felt a lump form in his throat. Was it possible that someone had already noticed the way things had shifted between them? He had hoped that his actions hadn't been too obvious, that the moments he'd shared with Sarah weren't as telling as he feared. But the concern in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She sat down, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the conversation hung heavily in the room. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't know what's going on between you two, but I've noticed some things," she said, her voice low. "Sarah has been spending more and more time with you. And I've seen how she looks at you. It's not right." The protagonist's heart sank. He tried to explain, tried to assure her that nothing inappropriate had happened, that he had only ever wanted to help Sarah. But the words felt hollow, as though they couldn't erase the growing tension between them. "I trust you," the mother continued, "but I need to make sure this isn't something more. You're her mentor, and that's where it should stay." Her words stung, even though he knew they were coming from a place of concern. He had crossed a line he hadn't meant to cross, and now it felt like the trust he had built with Sarah was at risk. As the conversation ended, the protagonist was left in a state of deep reflection. He had always been clear about maintaining boundaries, but the feelings between him and Sarah were now undeniable. And now, with the mother's concerns, it felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of how to move forward without damaging everything. He knew something had to change. The path they were on was dangerous, emotionally and ethically. But he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next, the bond between him and Sarah would never be the same again. The days following that conversation with Sarah's mother were filled with a quiet, unsettling tension. The protagonist couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped between two conflicting desires. On one hand, he wanted to respect the boundaries he had promised to maintain. He had always been a man of principles, a man who believed in structure and professionalism. On the other hand, there was Sarah, the girl whose presence had slowly but surely found its way into his heart. The emotions he was feeling were real, undeniable, but they were also dangerous. For a while, their meetings became strained. The easy camaraderie they once shared had been replaced with an awkward formality, as though both of them were walking on eggshells. Sarah seemed distant, quieter than usual, and the protagonist couldn't help but feel the weight of the unspoken words between them. It was clear that the conversation with her mother had left its mark. He wasn't sure if Sarah was avoiding him because she sensed the shift in their relationship, or if she was trying to protect him from the consequences of their growing connection. He found himself missing the way their conversations used to flow effortlessly, the shared laughter, the moments of silence that felt comfortable, the understanding they had developed without needing to say anything. Now, even the simplest interactions felt strained. He missed her smile, the one that had once been so easy and full of secret meaning. But that smile no longer came as easily, and he began to wonder if the trust they had built was beginning to crumble. It wasn't just Sarah's silence that haunted him. It was his own confusion. The boundaries had been crossed, but how far had they really gone? He tried to convince himself that they were still just two people trying to help each other. Yet, every time Sarah spoke, every time she smiled at him, every time their eyes met, he felt that unspoken connection tighten, pulling him deeper into feelings he was struggling to keep under control. As much as he tried to keep their relationship professional, he couldn't help but feel that the distance between them was now too great to ignore. And that's when Sarah made a choice. She decided to confront the situation, to break the silence that had been suffocating them both. One afternoon, Sarah arrived at his door earlier than usual, her face set with determination. She walked in without waiting for an invitation, an uncommon boldness in her step. The protagonist could immediately sense the shift in her energy. There was something different about her now. She wasn't the shy, reserved girl he had first met. There was a maturity in her demeanor, a strength that hadn't been there before. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice calm but firm. He nodded, unsure of where this conversation would lead. He had no idea if she was angry with him or if she was about to open up about everything that had been weighing on her mind. They sat down, both of them avoiding eye contact for a moment, as though unsure how to begin. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she started, her voice soft but steady. "About what my mom said, about the way things have been between us." The protagonist's heart raced. He didn't know what to say, what to do. He had been expecting something like this, but the weight of her words still hit him hard. "I don't want you to feel like we're crossing a line," she continued, her eyes meeting his for the first time in days. "But I've been feeling something too. And I don't want to hide it anymore." Her words were like a punch to the gut. He had known all along that something had been building between them, but hearing her say it aloud made everything feel so much more real, so much more complicated. "I know I'm your mentee, and I know what that means. But I can't ignore the way I feel," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't want to make things harder, but I need to be honest with you. I think I like you." The confession hung in the air, thick with emotion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The protagonist's mind raced as he tried to process her words. This was what he had feared, the line they had both crossed without even realizing it. This wasn't just about mentoring anymore. It was about something more dangerous, something neither of them could simply wish away. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had promised to guide her, to help her navigate her life, not to become someone who could make her feel like this. And yet, here they were, both caught up in a web of emotions neither of them fully understood. "I care about you, Sarah," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't, this isn't right. You're still a teenager. I'm your mentor. I can't let things go any further." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she nodded, the weight of his words hitting her hard. But she didn't back down. Instead, she took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for whatever came next. "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help how I felt." There was a long silence between them, and in that silence, the protagonist realized something he hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't just about what was right or wrong. It was about the connection they had created, the bond that had formed between them in spite of all the boundaries they had tried to set. Neither of them had intended for this to happen, but it had. "I don't want to lose you," Sarah said quietly, her eyes pleading with him. "I don't want to lose you either," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. But I can't be the one who leads you down the wrong path. The words felt like a finality, but even as he said them, he knew that they were just the beginning of an even more complicated journey. The feelings were there, undeniable, but the consequences of acting on them were too great. He had to let her go, even if it broke both of their hearts. As Sarah stood to leave, she hesitated at the door, her eyes lingering on him for one last moment. Then, without a word, she left. And in that silence, the protagonist felt the weight of their bond shift once again, unsure of what would come next but knowing one thing for certain. Their story wasn't over yet. The days that followed Sarah's departure were a blur of emotions for the protagonist. He couldn't escape the heaviness in his heart, the guilt that weighed down on him every time he thought about the conversation they had shared. It wasn't just the confession that had shaken him, it was the fact that, deep down, he had felt the same way. He had tried so hard to deny it, to convince himself that his feelings for Sarah were nothing more than a mentor's concern. But in the quiet moments after she left, he knew the truth. He cared for her, more than he should have, more than was appropriate. The silence in his home was suffocating. It was as though her absence had filled every corner, making it impossible for him to focus on anything else. He couldn't escape the memory of her words, the look in her eyes, the way she had so bravely confessed what he had been trying to suppress. The protagonist was torn. He knew the right thing to do was to maintain his distance, to stop everything before it went any further. But his heart, as irrational as it seemed, couldn't let go of the connection they had shared. Sarah had been his world for the past few months, and now, without her, he felt adrift. He tried to distract himself with work, with the routines that had once given his life structure. But nothing felt the same. Every task felt hollow, and every conversation felt empty. His thoughts kept drifting back to her, to the quiet moments they had shared, to the way she had made him feel alive again, even if it was just for a fleeting moment. But no matter how hard he tried to deny it, there was something inside of him that knew they couldn't go back to where they had been. The boundaries had been crossed, and now, there was no way to unlearn what they had learned about each other. The connection was real, but so were the consequences. It was the morning that changed everything. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his restless sleep, and for a moment, he thought he might still be dreaming. He had been expecting nothing, and yet here was Sarah, standing in front of him. Her presence was almost overwhelming, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, staring at each other, both uncertain of what the next step would be. I needed to talk to you, Sarah said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, as if she, too, was unsure of what was happening. The protagonist's heart skipped a beat. She was here, standing in front of him, and though they had both promised to keep their distance, it was clear that neither of them had truly let go. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter, but the weight of the situation was not lost on him. This wasn't just a casual visit, it was the culmination of everything they had been avoiding, everything they had been too afraid to address. Once inside, they sat across from each other, the tension palpable. Sarah seemed different, more vulnerable, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. She was no longer the carefree, smiling girl he had first met. She had grown in so many ways, emotionally, mentally, and it was clear that this moment wasn't just about them anymore. It was about both of them finding a way to navigate what had happened between them. I've been thinking a lot, Sarah began, her eyes fixed on her hands. About everything, about you, about me, about the way I feel. She paused, her voice catching. And I realized something important. The protagonist's heart clenched. Was she about to tell him she had changed her mind? Was she going to say that everything they had shared had been a mistake? He braced himself for the words that would inevitably come, but when Sarah looked up at him, it was with a new understanding. I know we can't be what we were, she said, her voice soft but clear. But I also know that what we had, it wasn't wrong. It was just complicated. And maybe, it still is. The protagonist was stunned. He had expected anger, disappointment, or maybe even guilt. But instead, Sarah was offering him something else, understanding. She wasn't asking for more, but she wasn't ready to let go completely either. Her words were a lifeline, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe again. I don't want to make you feel like you have to make a decision, she continued, her eyes searching his face for any sign of what he was feeling. But I needed to know where we stood. Because I think we both need closure. Whether that's to move forward or to walk away, I don't know. But I think we need to figure it out. The silence between them stretched out as the protagonist processed what she had said. Closure. That was exactly what they needed. He had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering how to move forward, unsure of what the right thing to do was. But now, with Sarah sitting across from him, he realized that they both had a decision to make, not just about their future, but about the past they had shared. "I don't regret helping you," he finally said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't regret the time we spent together, even if it wasn't always easy. But I know now that I can't be the person you need me to be. I've been your mentor, and I'll always be there for you. But what we shared, it's not something we can build on. Not in the way we both want." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand," she whispered, and there was a sadness in her voice, but also a sense of acceptance. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both mourning something they couldn't have, a future that was never meant to be. But despite the pain, there was also a sense of peace. They had shared something beautiful, something complicated and imperfect, but it was real. "I'm glad we talked," Sarah said finally, standing up. "Maybe one day, we'll be able to look back on this and understand it better. But for now, I think we both need to move on." The protagonist stood as well, watching her with a bittersweet smile. "I'm always here for you, Sarah," he said softly. She smiled back, though it was tinged with sadness. "I know." And as Sarah walked out the door, something inside the protagonist shifted. He had lost her in one way, but he had also gained something, a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly care for someone, even when circumstances made it impossible to be together. He knew that their paths might never cross in the same way again, but he also knew that what they had shared would stay with him forever, a secret smile in his heart that no one else would ever fully understand. As Sarah disappeared from his sight, he realized that sometimes the hardest thing wasn't saying goodbye, it was letting go of what might have been. As the protagonist stood by the door, watching Sarah disappear into the distance, he felt a mix of relief and sadness. Their story had reached its inevitable conclusion, but it was far from the end of their journey as individuals. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't knowing when to say goodbye, it's accepting that not all connections are meant to last forever, no matter how deep or intense they may feel. Their time together, though brief, had been transformative for both of them. It had taught them valuable lessons about boundaries, respect, and the complexities of human connection. They had each grown, not just from the bond they shared but from the challenges that came with it. And while their paths had diverged, the impact of their time together would remain, shaping them in ways they could never have predicted. As you watch this story unfold, perhaps it reminds you of moments in your own life, times when you've had to make difficult choices, when you've had to let go of something or someone you thought you could never part with. It's a story of learning, growing, and ultimately finding peace with what cannot be changed. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and the emotions it brought up, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt and dramatic stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the protagonist made the right choice? Leave a comment below and share your perspective with us. And as always, stay tuned for more emotional journeys, unexpected twists, and stories that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.